recorder. 10 years ago, when I taught this class, it was 15 weeks on the narrative paradigm, Walter Fisher's narrative paradigm, which we talked about a little last week. This year, this time with this class, today is the only day that we're going to set aside for the narrative paradigm. Next week, we start getting into other things. They're about storytelling, but they're not about the narrative paradigm. I did want to show you a couple of things in Moodle. Last week, I was going to do this, but I got here and realized I didn't have the handle and password on my tablet to log into Moodle, but now I do, so never too late. Today, I'm going to have slides, the same as I did yesterday, or the same as I did last week. And if words come up, you should not feel like you have to write them down, because the presentation, maybe you can see there, right now it's not available yet, but it will become available at the end of class. I'm going to do that every week from now on. So you can write things down if taking notes helps you focus. Students sometimes tell me that, but you don't have to. Okay. The assignment here, the article report, the options for it are in this folder. You could download all the articles in that folder if you like and have a look and see which ones interest you. If you come here to the sign up, it'll tell you what the title of each article is. Each of these is a study that was published in an academic journal that applied Walter Fisher's narrative paradigm. So I think if we wind up with 3 students in class and that's it, I think we're going to have the 3 of you work together on picking one and doing a report on it. Okay, those are the things I wanted to show you in Moodle. So now, boom, boom, come on. All right. That word right there is paradigma. Paradigma is a Greek word. The literal translation of it is pattern or example or sample. And I went looking for a good Japanese translation of it, and where there are English writings that talk about a paradigm and they've been translated into Japanese, they tend to use this, wakugumi. But it seems like the definition of that, the primary definition, or the translation into English, would just be framework. And framework is not quite what paradigm means. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on what a paradigm means and then a paradigm shift. And then we'll get in detail into what Walter Fisher was talking about. Okay, the meaning of a paradigm. When you take something abstract and you give an example, but the example's a really good central example, then you have the paradigm case. So, I might talk about a mammal, and a mammal is an animal that is not a fish or a reptile. A mammal has fur. When it gives birth, it has its babies live. It doesn't lay eggs. And it feeds its babies with milk. Human beings are mammals. If I said to you, bring me a mammal, and you brought me a platypus. Well, the thing about a platypus, it doesn't give birth to its babies live. It lays eggs. And it does produce milk for its babies, but it is the only animal that produces milk that does not have nipples. Instead, what it has glands that release milk into channels on its skin and sometimes into clumps of its fur. So if I said, bring me a mammal, and you brought me a platypus, well, kind of, but not really. But on the other hand, if I said, bring me a mammal, and you brought me a Highland cow. Now, a Highland cow has calves, and a Highland cow definitely produces milk. They raise them in England for their milk. And I mean, look at it. It has fur. It has lots of fur. So that is a paradigm case of a mammal. A platypus is a borderline case. A Highland cow is a paradigm case. Second example, if I were to say, bring me Japanese food, and you brought me a hamburger sold at a McDonald's in Japan, where the bun was made out of rice. Is that Japanese food?
No.
You could almost say kind of. Was it made in Japan? Yes. Did they change the bun to where it wasn't made with flour, it was made with rice? Yes. But you're right. It's not a clear example of Japanese food. But how about okonomiyaki? That's Japanese food. Do you know I had my first okonomiyaki day before yesterday? That is so good. I don't want to go home now. Okay, so when we talk about a paradigm, we mean an example of an abstract concept, mammal, Japanese food, and the example is right in the center of the concept. So there was a philosopher by the name of Thomas Kuhn, and he got to talking about scientific paradigms. One of the things he said is a brand new science becomes a mature science when the science has a paradigm that nearly all the scientists agree about. What that paradigm consists of, there are facts that people accept, and there are methods that people accept, and that helps them separate the science correctly practiced from junk science. So you might think about medicine. And there are a lot of people who make money selling foods and other preparations, and they say that they have medical value. They can cure you when you're sick. And they are fraud. They don't work. They are people making money by lying to their customers. And people who really know how to practice medicine and how medicine is supposed to be practiced, they recognize that that's fraud. And the paradigm of the practice of medicine is what separates them. So, one thing, Thomas Kuhn wrote about paradigms because he said, from time to time, the old paradigm doesn't work anymore. We start to discover things that the old paradigm cannot explain. And as more and more questions get harder and harder to answer, the paradigm effectively, it shifts, it breaks, and it's replaced by a better paradigm. And I have for you 4 examples. I have no idea what that is. Oh, okay. Going all the way back to ancient times, what doctors thought caused contagious diseases was that a sick person would give off a gas, almost a poison gas, and they called it, let me see if I have my markers here, they called it what did I do with my markers? They called it a miasma. I'm going to want these later. Oh, come on. I may have left them in my office. That was dumb of me. Oh, well. The theory was, let's say that you had cholera or you had the flu, that you would breathe out just gas, and the gas was poison. And the important thing, if you wanted not to get sick, was you had to not inhale the gas. And so in the days of the Black Plague, this is what doctors wore. And inside that beak, they had very, very powerful spices, so that if they went to treat a plague patient, they wouldn't inhale it. Well, in between 1850 and 1870, scientists were able to demonstrate for the first time, and the first disease was anthrax, but they were able to demonstrate contagious disease is spread by germs. Germs are living creatures. It's not a smoke. Smelling a sick person does not make you sick. And there was a paradigm shift. Miasma theory, which was ancient, and everyone had accepted, this is how you get sick, it was discredited and it went away. And today we know germ theory. Example number 2. For most of human history, we thought by observation that the Earth was the center of the universe, and everything went around it in big spheres. And the spheres were not that far away. Well, around the time of Copernicus, and later, even more, Galileo, we came to understand the Earth is not the center of the universe. It's not even the center of the solar system. The sun is, but the sun is not the center of the universe. The universe has no center. When we understood that, the old paradigm of everything being in spheres, it broke, and it was replaced by the idea that we're traveling through space and there is no center to the universe. 2 more examples, and then I'll get on with the rest of what we have to say. For much of the 1900s in psychology, the paradigm was behaviorism. And behaviorism, the idea is everything you do is caused by the environment acting on you. When you learn, it's because there was information and there was motivation and there were rewards, and you therefore behaved and you acquired what you were being taught. So if you give rats the proper rewards or punishments at the right time, they'll learn tricks. That was the paradigm then, because researchers in the field of psychology said the brain is too complicated, its secrets are hidden, there's no way to know how the brain works, so instead we just need to observe animals and also people, and we will learn how they behave when certain things happen. Well, in the 1990s and 2000s, actually a little earlier than that, the invention of measuring devices like functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, let us study how the brain operated while people were thinking. And researchers became able to study things like depression and anxiety and to see if someone has an anxiety episode, what parts of the brain are activated and what are they doing? And back in the days of behaviorism, they thought that was impossible. So once this became a possibility, the old paradigm broke and was discarded. Last example, just because I have to beat this one to death for the rest of this to make sense. We go back to medicine for the last example. For most of history, we have had in the field of medicine the doctor who was the expert. The doctor went to medical school. Before there were medical schools, the doctor would apprentice with another doctor. They were the wise person, they were experienced, and they would observe you, ask you questions, they would judge what you had. Doctors gave orders, and you were expected to obey the orders because the doctor was a professional and had wisdom other people don't have. In about the 1980s, 90s, and beyond, well, before then, a lot of people had said it's possible to practice medicine scientifically using the scientific method and to take diagnoses, diseases, injuries, and to study them with very carefully designed studies. It's also possible to take medicine and therapy and to test those with carefully designed studies. This came up a lot in the past couple of years with the COVID vaccine. Have we tested it enough? Have we done double-blind studies? Today, that's just expected, that anything a doctor puts in front of you, prescribes for you, that it will have been scientifically studied. But for most of the history of medicine, it wasn't. If the doctor said this will work, you assumed the doctor was right. But the old paradigm then was clinical judgment. Clinical judgment. A skillful doctor knew what they were talking about and you obeyed them. The paradigm that broke, and what replaced it is what we call evidence-based medicine. So everything is based on testing, and everything that is prescribed has behind it carefully designed studies that prove that it works. All right. 4 examples of where paradigms shifted. So here I will take just a minute and I will say, I would say around the 2000s up through about 2010, this is around the time that there had been big inventions, several waves of them. There was the internet, then there was the smartphone, and now social media. Mark Zuckerberg is now trying to move into Meta and very, very large-scale virtual reality. And people who think about those and write about them and become consultants, they want to call every new invention a paradigm shift. I don't know if you've heard that term used. But they'll come along with a device, a driverless car, and they'll say, this is a paradigm shift. And they say that to try to hype up how excited people should be, chiefly because they want to make money. And what one thing I hope goes with you and whoever listens to this lecture later out of this class, a paradigm shift is a very specific thing. It's not just a big change. It's that the old way of understanding an entire way of thinking, that old way is discredited and it's discarded because we have a better one now. All right. All of that brings us to Walter Fisher. Now I brought...
Walter Fisher said that paradigm is not a big deal. It's not so big. And what did you say in the last?
Oh, I'm sorry. There are people who will call everything a paradigm shift because they want you to believe whatever they're selling. They'll say, I've got this new kind of smartphone. This is going to be a paradigm shift. So mostly I just wanted to attune you. I wanted you to be skeptical when you hear someone say, this is a paradigm shift, when they're really just bringing a new product out on the market. Yeah, that's all that meant.
Okay, so we have to be skeptical.
Right.
Paradigm shift.
There have been paradigm shifts, and we just went through a few of them. And Walter's going to make the argument that understanding all communication as narrative is a paradigm shift. But I just interrupted myself to say, people use paradigm shift, that phrase, like it's trendy, like they can make money off it. By the way, one thing I love, I have been in Japan teaching for about 5 weeks, and the first couple of weeks, I kept asking questions and asking people, so what do you think? What comments do you want to make? I have never had a student speak up. Thank you. Please do that more. Because I came in here and I've been talking the whole time because I thought I had to. But we can have a conversation. Yeah. Please interrupt me anytime I'm not making sense. I love that. Yes. Okay. I learned 1 or 2 interesting things about Walter Fisher that will take under 5 minutes. When he finished high school, joined the Army. And he went with the United States Army and fought in the Korean War. And when the Korean War ended, he became a Marine drill sergeant and did that for a number of years and had never been to college. And his superior officer told him, you're smart, you should go to college. He went to college, he went all the way through, got his doctorate, and became a professor. And the other thing I like about Walter Fisher, through most of his life, his hobby was doing magic tricks. And if any of the other professors brought their children in, he would do magic for them to entertain them. So he looks like kind of a nice grandpa. Okay. So, Walter Fisher. He thought he could explain something about communication that was so fundamental that he wanted to make the argument that it was a paradigm shift. In the 1970s, okay, you remember what we said before. Thomas Kuhn said, you're not a mature science until you have a paradigm that everybody agrees with. Well, Fisher and a number of other professors, they took that to heart and they started to say, well, contagious disease has its paradigm, germ theory. Psychology has its paradigm, cognitive psychology. What's ours? And a lot of researchers tried to explain in terms of communication, what is human nature? What is a human being? And one popular view was that human beings are the ones who try to maximize rewards and minimize pain. And there's there are a lot of theoretical frameworks in the study of communication that say we move into relationships and out of them, and we decide what to say to try to maximize our reward and try to minimize our pain. And there are problems with that view. Another view was that human beings are naturally curious. And the reason we communicate, whenever we feel uncertain, we don't know what's happening, we communicate to make our uncertainty come down. And then when we feel certain, we stop communicating because we don't need to. It's been compared before to, you know it's time to eat when you feel hungry, and then after you've eaten, you stop feeling hungry, so you stop eating. Same thing with uncertainty. You know it's time to communicate when you feel uncertain, down comes the uncertainty, and you stop communicating. But there are problems with that view as well. Another view is that human beings are the symbol-using animal, that we are in a category with other life forms, but they can't use symbols. We're the only ones who have symbols. And the people who made that argument, they would say animals are sometimes uncertain, and animals sometimes try to maximize reward and minimize pain. Those are all things that we share with every other life form on Earth. Symbols, on the other hand, are unique to human beings. And Fisher said that doesn't go far enough. And he said, what distinguishes us from other life forms, we are the ones that tell stories. And so, in introducing the narrative paradigm, he said, if he had his way, we would stop calling human beings Homo sapiens, and we would start calling them Homo narrans, the storytelling hominid. So what he says, the important part of this is that the thing communication does not do, it never simply, accurately, and completely describes. It's not possible. Most movies that tell a story tell a made-up story. Tends to be a fantasy, tends to come out of the imagination of the screenwriter. But some movies are documentaries, and documentaries are not made up. They're supposed to be accurate. But even documentaries, what the documentarian will try to do is pick from among the facts and tell a story. There was a controversy over the past couple of years in the United States over police violence, an ongoing controversy, but it got really heated. And as a result, in a lot of places in the United States, police officers now wear body cameras. And people got very hopeful. If there's a camera right there, we'll see everything that happened because the camera will just record everything. But movie makers said, that's not what'll happen. If a camera only points in certain directions, if it's only pointed the direction the officer is looking, it will take in some things, it will miss other things, and what it takes in will be one side of the story. And this is what Walter Fisher is saying. You never take in everything. It's not possible. We can't do it. Reporters and journalists, they are trying to be accurate. They want to collect the facts and report them. But they always call it a story. And they say, I'm going after that story. And there's an old saying about journalists. A journalist, a reporter, is somebody who can go to a local government meeting that goes on for 8 hours and then can write 3 paragraphs that contain everything you need to know about what happened. They just boil it down to the part you need to know. And that, in some sense, is what Walter Fisher is saying we do when we communicate. We look at the reality around us. We don't take all of it. We pick parts of it. And those become the story. All right. Go ahead.
Now I don't understand.
Okay.
Why you talk about paradigm.
Sure. Right. What he's going to do, and I'm going to get to this about 5 minutes from now, is he's going to say, we have an old way of understanding communication. And this old way he called the rational world. And he said the rational world is wrong. It cannot explain what we do when we communicate. I have a new paradigm I want to propose, and my paradigm says all communication is storytelling. Right. Very good question. Thank you for that. All right. So every time you send a message, oh, wait a minute, there was one more thing I was going to show you when it comes to how we pick things out. What do you see on that slide?
A dog,
Mm-hmm.
and the Japanese national flag,
Uh-huh.
and 5 letters.
Mm-hmm. A, I, U, E, O. Is there anything else on there? That's not a trick question. It's not a trick question.
White screen.
Yeah, there's a white. Is there anything else on there? Not a trick question. It really isn't.
Sky.
Well, sure. In the picture of the flag. Okay. Is there anything else in there?
The stick of
Flagpole. You're doing good. You're doing good. I wouldn't have thought to answer any of that. Now, is there anything else in there?
That's it.
Very good. My point in putting a limited number of things on a slide was to say, we can sit here and in about, probably that was 10, 15 seconds, we can describe everything on that slide. A, I, U, E, O, frog, a little shadow under the frog, Japanese national flag, flagpole, blue sky, white backdrop, that is everything on that slide. Never in your life do you walk into a room and do that. Never do you notice everything. Never do you notice the 2 flyers on the wall and all the switches, you walk right past them. You focus in perceptually on the things that matter for you. And there are all kinds of details, scratches on the wall at the back, that we just ignore. The point is, we select what we need to make meaning out of what we're doing. And selecting what you need to make meaning, that is storytelling. We talked briefly last week about how a bad storyteller will bog down in the detail, but a good storyteller picks only the detail they need to create a reality in their listener's imagination. And it's not too many details, it's the right details. Okay. Walter Fisher said, every time you send a message, first of all, it is rooted in time and space. Here's what he meant by that. There was a time before you said it, there is a time after you said it, and the message itself has a beginning and a middle and an end, and people's understanding of it has a beginning and a middle and an end. For the old paradigm to be true, for the rational world paradigm to be true, you would have to be able to freeze time and say, this is how this is. If you wanted to say everything about that door, you would have to be able to say, here are the characteristics of the door, the things that can be said about the door, and they've been true and they will be true. That is what the door is. But Fisher would say, almost anything we describe, we say, here are things I'm pointing out about the door. You didn't notice them until I began talking about them. And after I'm done, part of what you bring with you when you come back to this room will be your memory of the things pointed out to you about that door. So there was a before, there was a during, there's an after, and things change. That's only one reason. There are multiple reasons, but that's one of the reasons. Messages are rooted in time and space. They have a before and after, they have a beginning, middle, and end. The second thing is that messages, everything you say ever, reveals aspects of your identity. Every time you talk, every time you send a message, the people around you who get the message, they have more of an idea of who you are. And Fisher, this was huge for Fisher. The stories you've responded to in your life, I'm willing to bet you did in large part because of powerful characters, because we identify with the characters. And every time we communicate, we become more clear to other people as characters in their story. And every message you send to people has the potential to encourage them to identify more with you or to identify less with you. The third and final thing that Fisher said in getting this whole discussion started was every time you communicate, other people are invited to interpret what does your message mean? What is its value for their life? What is its value for their lives? Is there something they should be doing differently, understanding differently? I'm going to give you about a 2 or 3 minute example of a talk I give regularly in communication classes, and you can tell me at the end whether there are implications for how you ought to conduct your life a little differently. You know, I assume, because it's all over the news, that in the generation after you graduate from college, we are right on the brink of automation and artificial intelligence completely changing the workplace. There are job descriptions that will cease to exist. Here's what we know, because there are already some viable versions of this going on. What seems likely to happen is automation and artificial intelligence will not replace human beings, they will partner with them. And in particular, the automation is never going to be as good at connecting and empathizing with humans as another human. Easy example. I get these moments where I think I used this example before, so if I did, stop me, okay? Dermatologists. One big thing, dermatologists, doctors who examine things on your skin, one big thing that dermatologists do is if you have a mole, they'll look at it and they'll know either that's harmless or that's skin cancer. But even as of right now, artificial intelligence is more accurate than the dermatologist. Much more accurate. It's not close. But what that means is you still need a human being who can talk to the patient, and if the artificial intelligence has said you have skin cancer, the human, who's a dermatologist, explains what it means, what are their options, and can comfort them if it's upsetting. So maybe I just am biased because I teach interpersonal communication. But what artificial intelligence and automation are doing is they're making person-to-person skills more important. You go back a couple of centuries, and you could make a really good living and support a family just going out and flexing your muscles every day, picking up things and carrying them. But now we have powered machinery to do that. So humans do other things. And there are more and more things that used to require human judgment that machines are about to be able to do. But the thing a machine we have not succeeded in teaching them to do is to relate to another person the way a person can. Okay, that's my message. That's why people ought to study interpersonal communication, because of artificial intelligence. Now, by Walter Fisher's test, if you think I'm right, does that change maybe how you plan your career?
It's story thing. For planning my career, I want to look at other countries
Sure.
to have experience and communicate with people from other countries and using Spanish or English. And after that, in Japan, I want to try many jobs for 1 week or 5 days.
Right.
And I will choose one job then.
Perfect. But will you, as you think about those jobs, will you take a look at them and say, I wonder if this job might be changed by automation? Will that ever cross your mind?
So what is the purpose of my story?
Oh no, I'm just saying the message I just gave you, if you think that that's true, that artificial intelligence is going to change jobs and it's going to make people skills more important, should that change what you do?
Okay. So I think that the communication between people, human and human, is more important.
Sure.
Because what robots do doesn't make us happy.
True.
And what makes us happy is what humans do.
True. I agree. But some people in college are studying because they want to do jobs. I have a lot of students minoring in communication who are majoring in accounting. More and more accounting can be done by an artificial intelligence engine. They may find it's harder and harder to find a job. And if they do have a job, it's about taking what the artificial intelligence produced and just explaining it. Which means what they study in college, instead of studying accounting as much as they do, maybe they need to spend more time on their communication skills. So my example here is just, Under the old rational world paradigm, people would have said, that message I gave you a minute ago, you agree with it or you don't. Fisher would say, actually, it becomes part of your story. And if you do agree with it, you change what you do. And if you don't agree with it, you go on to tell other people. There's this artificial intelligence thing people are talking about, but I think they're wrong. That the conversation goes on into the future, and the story just has more chapters. I'm going to pause here because it looks like you're thinking hard.
So, what Wilshire says,
Mm-hmm.
in the old epoch, communication between humans what was important, and now, in contrast, now.
Okay. The whole artificial intelligence thing, Fisher never talked about artificial intelligence. He died before he knew that it was going to amount to anything. That was my example.
Okay.
He's saying, and actually, I should get on to, let's see, let me skip some of this and get to what he said was the old paradigm and the new paradigm. Okay. Walter Fisher said that the old paradigm that was outdated, there were 5 things he said about it. He said, first, human beings are essentially rational human beings. We are different from animals because we think. And we think, and we reason, and we weigh evidence, and we say this is true or this is false. The second thing he said about the old paradigm, we make decisions. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to go live in Spain. I'm going to go marry this person I met. We make decisions on the basis of arguments and evidence. Third thing he said, the type of speaking situation is what determines the kind of argument you make. So if you're arguing with scientists, you use science. If you are arguing in court, you use the law. And each different speaking situation, you argue differently. Fourth, he said, whether you are rational depends on how much you know and how well you argue. And fifth and finally, the world is a set of puzzles, and we can solve the puzzles if we analyze it. Now, those 5 statements, he said, that's the old paradigm, and those are wrong. Okay, you ready for this? Here's the new paradigm. Instead of people being essentially rational and thinking, what we do is we tell stories. So if I wanted to be rational about this room, every time I walked into it, I would look at every single object and mark in here and make my decisions having taken in all available information. But we don't do that. We select parts of it that are meaningful. And that's the same process as telling a story. So the old paradigm said, we make decisions, go to college, go to Spain, on the basis of good arguments. He said, actually, we make decisions on the basis of values. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? Do we want to be happy with other human beings? You suggested that. Do we want to be very wealthy, make a lot of money? Do we want to be very famous and respected? Those are the things, not necessarily rational arguments, that drive us to make our decisions. The old paradigm said the way you talk is determined by the speaking situation. So you use science with a scientist, you use law with a lawyer. He actually said values cut across all of that. And values come from history, they come from your own life story, they come from your culture, and interestingly, he said, they come from your character. And we've already mentioned, story is driven by the power of the characters. And he said, every single situation where people communicate, they are drawn to or repelled by. They either love certain characters and want to be more like them, or they are repelled by certain characters and want to be different from them. Okay. So then, were you about to? Please, go ahead.
There's a thing we can choose that make us happy. And he said that in the old epoch, people can rationally choose the thing that can make us happy. But now we cannot choose that, and we make a mistake, choose wrong way, such as money, giving much money or giving much prestige.
He, I think, would say, okay, the part of the paradigm we were talking about there, he said sometimes people communicate differently. The old paradigm was that people communicated differently because if you talk to scientists, you need to use science. But he said that's a misunderstanding. That's not why people communicate differently. People communicate differently because their values are different. And so where people share values, a scientist who wants to be famous and well-respected will understand the messages of a musician who wants to be famous and well-respected because their values match. And if you want to be happy with other people, enjoy the company of really lovable people, you might meet a social worker, and then maybe a preacher, and then maybe a school teacher. That's what they want too. They're in different professions, they do different things, but your values match theirs. Much of what you say will make sense to them.
So in this now, value exists.
Right.
And the old era, how about value?
He said that in the old rational world paradigm, that it was about, we measured communication by the strength of the evidence and the strength of the argument. And we said that evidence and argument changed between law and science and religion and art. That if an artist tried to talk to a scientist, they wouldn't understand each other because this is art and this is science and they're different. And Fisher said, oh, no. Artists and scientists talk to each other all the time. And if they share values, they understand each other. Okay. The fourth thing that he said about the old paradigm was rationality is determined. How much do we know and how well we argue? That's the old paradigm. But he said stories are rational based on two technical terms. And I'm going to talk about the technical terms in a minute. Coherence. I really do want my marker. My marker's in here. I'm going to find it because I want to put these on the board. Where are you? Actually, I did leave them upstairs. Tempted to just type it out for you. Anyway, coherence is, do you want to jot it down? You don't have to, but I'll read it into the recording. You can do it later if you want to. Coherence, Coherence. And then fidelity, Fidelity. So he said stories, they have coherence, and they have fidelity. And we're going to come back to those terms in a minute. Final thing about the old paradigm was, the old paradigm is a set of puzzles, and we can solve the puzzles if we analyze them. But he said, in the new paradigm, your entire life is a set of stories, and you choose which story do you want to live inside. When other people communicate, they're telling you part of their story. And when you agree with it, you're choosing to live inside their story. But if you don't agree with it, you're stepping outside their story. You're not joining your story with theirs. Okay. So now, let me get to those two words I said I was going to talk about before. Coherence and fidelity. Narrative coherence. Have you ever read a novel, read a work of fiction, or watched a movie where the world that they made was so convincing that you could just kind of get lost inside it? You got caught up in this story, and it all made sense. And on the other hand, have you ever read a story that was so kind of poorly written that there were little details that you kept saying, well, now that doesn't make any sense. Why would that happen? There's a thing authors do called world building, and they'll decide who their characters are going to be, and then they'll decide where they live, what they do, and they'll introduce their friends, and they'll describe the weather. And some people do it so skillfully that it feels like a real world. And others do it so poorly that you never really believe it. And so Fisher said, when people communicate, the stories they tell about the world either are believable because they're complete, they have all the details, or there are details missing, or there are details that contradict, that make it very, very hard to believe the story. And that's one measure. High in coherence, a narrative with a lot of coherence is a good narrative. It's a powerful narrative. People are likely to believe it. The other one is fidelity. A couple of things are true about narrative fidelity. You hear lots of different stories from lots of different people. And if you've got one story that doesn't match everybody else's, that one is likely to be low in fidelity. So I've had a lot of people tell me, in Japan, it's very, very good to maintain harmony, to not call attention to things that might embarrass people. Well, let's say that I meet someone who says, oh no, the Japanese, they love to fight and they love to make fun of and humiliate people. Well, that one person's story doesn't match everybody else's. So that's low in fidelity. Another aspect of fidelity is it the kind of story you want to live in? The characters in the story, are they characters that you find it easy to have empathy with? That you say, I know why these people think the way they do. If you talk to someone who what they want most out of life is to make money, and they keep talking about how exciting it is when the money is rolling in and all the possibilities that the money opens up, and how you can live a really fine, comfortable life, and you can empathize with that. You think that really is how life is. That narrative is high in fidelity for you. But if you talk to someone who doesn't make that much money, but they have really powerful friendships, and they're really satisfied with the people they spend their time with, and you say, I identify with that. I'm on your wavelength. That makes sense to me. That's the kind of world I want to live in. Then their narrative has higher fidelity. Okay, let me pause there on coherence and fidelity. You've been asking such great questions. I want you to, whatever you think of them, I want to hear about it.
Yeah, I think I understand about coherence and fidelity.
Sure.
And the Walter Fisher places importance on fidelity.
Both.
And also, if he places importance on fidelity, so what many people say is important, and what few people say is not important.
Well, if what a few people say is very different, sharply different from what everyone else says. So one example we used last week is when there's an election and you have two people running for office. The person who holds the office will tell the story that the country or the community is doing very well. You just need to continue it. And then the one who wants to be elected, is not currently in office, will tell the story, oh no, this country is doing terrible. We need to change direction. The narrative that will be higher in fidelity, when you look around and talk to the people in your life, are they doing well? Are they happy? Is their life pretty okay? If it is, then the leader who says this country's on the right track, that's high in fidelity, because it matches what the people around you are experiencing. And the person who says, oh no, this country's falling apart, well, that's low in fidelity, because nobody you know thinks so.
In the first place, why does he talk about fidelity? Because if it's for great importance in what many people say, what few people say will be ignored. So, okay, I have to think about
This is a good thought. If you want to keep talking it out, I mean, we have like half an hour. And if you want to think about it some more and talk next week, we could do it. Either way you want to do it.
Can you define why our author Fisher made that paradigm in the first place?
He thought, actually, some of the stuff I skipped over to get to the paradigm. Okay. He goes all the way back to ancient Greece. And in ancient Greece, originally, wisdom was every kind of talk. So if you had to, as a community, decide what to do, you had a crime problem and you had to decide what to do, you would include everything. You would include poetry, you would include history, you would include your own experience. But then he said, along came the philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, and they very publicly said, most thinking is illogical. The only logical thinking is philosophy. And philosophers should make all the decisions. And that, more or less in the West, and this is a North American Studies class, in Europe and in the United States after, people believed that for a long time, until about the 1800s with the Enlightenment, and then it became scientists. And even up through when he wrote his book in the 1980s, he had one case study in his book. There was a city, and the city had decided to let, it was a chemical plant, put in a dump for their chemicals in the city. And a lot of the people who lived in the city said, this is dangerous. This is going to get in our drinking water. And the city said, the scientists have examined it. They say it's safe, so we're doing it. And Fisher said, wait a minute. All these people who live in the city, we need to listen to them. And he said, the rational world paradigm says, the scientists have spoken, this is a rational question and nothing else. But all these people, they have their own narratives. And just the scientific evidence is not the end of it. These other narratives need to be heard as well. So to your question, why did he develop the paradigm? He said, we're treating public questions that we should talk about as though what the experts say is just all we need to know. And that's the rational world paradigm. And actually, we need to hear from all voices. And wisdom sometimes comes from people who aren't scientists. And the scientists are sometimes wrong. So that's where the paradigm came from. Cool. Let me give you one more example of fidelity. What if they made a movie? Here, let's say they made the movie here in Japan. And part of the movie was, it took place on the campus of Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. And Tokyo University of Foreign Studies in the movie was a tiny little set of 2 or 3 buildings, all very close together, and all the students, 100% of students in it were Japanese. And you went and you saw that movie. Would you come out saying, that is not Tokyo University of Foreign Studies at all? That's fidelity. And Fisher said, sometimes people hear a message and they say, that's just not what it's like at all. And other times people hear a message and they say, that message is so full of holes and contradictions that I find it impossible to believe. And that's coherence. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I understand.
Very cool. Very cool.
So it's coherence and fidelity
Mm-hmm.
are methods of...
They're measures. Measures. Yeah.
Investigating how the story, a person talking, is how it's spread or...
Well, whether it's a good story, whether it's a powerful story. So, to go back over to the Moodle again, with all these articles, you will find, actually that's not going to show you what you want, looking at the titles will help a little. The first one, A Blame Narrative Approach to Apologetic Crisis Management. That's an article about United Airlines. United Airlines had a bunch of very public mistakes they made, and they kept coming out with apology after apology. And the researchers are going to say, these apologies were all narratives. They said, we had to cancel a lot of flights. We had to strand people for Christmas. Here's what happened. Okay, you're not accepting that? Okay, here's our next apology. Here's what happened. And the researchers say these stories that United Airlines told to explain their behavior, either they lacked coherence because they kept changing their story. It was full of holes. Or they would say things were true, and people hearing it would say, that's not what it's like at all. So a good story, a story that people accept, which is good, powerful communication, is high in fidelity. People hear it and say, that's exactly what it's like. And it's also high in coherence. People listen to it and say, everything in there is very consistent. And I will very quick take a couple of seconds, because I was going to do this at the first class meeting. There's one in there about campaigns to try to get people involved against climate change. And those campaigns, the narratives that come with them, are they high in coherence and high in fidelity? There's one in here about a campaign to try to get teenagers to talk about mental health concerns instead of being scared. To try to convince them it's okay to talk publicly if your mental health is not good. And those campaigns to try to help teenagers see that it is okay, are those high in coherence, high in fidelity, or are the teenagers saying, that's not what it's like at all? Then there is, let's see, Russia and the stories it tells about why it invaded Ukraine. Is the story high in coherence, high in fidelity? The United States Marine Corps, how they inspire their own soldiers. Is that high in coherence, high in fidelity? And one that I thought was interesting, about 2009, I didn't know about this, but in the article, the researchers talk about a Korean TV show or movie called Winter Sonata that was very popular in Japan. And they look at that story and the narrative. Was it high in coherence? Was it high in fidelity? Why was it so powerful for people in Japan? So this gets applied across a lot of different situations. Airlines making apologies, mental health interventions for teenagers, Russia's army. Why do Japanese people watch TV shows? It just pops up all over the place. Well, the measuring communication by, is it very coherent and is it high in fidelity? Because you'll see when you pick your article and you read it, they very quickly get to the question of, well, they'll say, this is the narrative we're examining, and we want to know why this narrative had this effect. Was it its coherence? Was it its fidelity? So if you get those two measures, you understand most of what Walter Fisher is saying. Mm-hmm. Okay, let me open that one up. Keep talking.
Mm-hmm. I have never seen that movie, but so I should help with this article?
No. Eventually, the assignment is that you and your classmates will take one of these, and you're going to report kind of what question did the researchers ask, what was their method, what were their conclusions, and you're just going to report back. But they discuss Winter Sonata by using Walter Fisher's narrative paradigm. I'm going to go find it real quick.
Okay, so in the article, it's written that why Winter Sonata is so famous in Japan.
Right. So Fisher and narrative probability and narrative fidelity at that second paragraph. Yeah, they're going to talk about how all of this applies to that movie or TV show and how that explains why did it take off in Japan. What was it about that story that Japanese audiences found it high in coherence, high in fidelity?
In my opinion,
Go ahead.
why Winter Sonata is so famous in Japan
Okay.
Because many people like to watch Korean TV or Korean movies.
Right.
And in addition, the content of the movie is, I think it's love story, and which people favorite.
Sure.
And the actors in the movie are so famous in Japan.
Okay.
And, okay. So it's my story about why Windows Mata is famous.
Well, the whole point of this, and what happens in this class, it's not the case that we're going to come every week and we're going to tell our own story. But this is a situation where those researchers said it was surprising the Winter Sonata should be as popular as it is. We're going to try to apply what Walter Fisher said about narrative coherence and narrative fidelity, and we're going to see, does that explain why this was so popular? And you have an assignment weeks from now, long time from now, I think in January, where you are going to take what these researchers did and explain it to the class.
Okay. So I have to look at this by the measure of coherence and fidelity.
Well, you're going to explain what they found. They applied the measures of fidelity and coherence to this movie to try to explain why did it appeal to Japanese audiences. Part of the point of why I'm showing you this, the studies that use Fisher's narrative paradigm are so all over the place because Fisher was saying, you remember, we started this off by saying all communication is storytelling. So, encouraging teenagers to talk about their mental health, Russia and how it justifies invading Ukraine, apologizing for canceling airplane flights, that's all storytelling. And most of the different methods for analyzing communication apply to a limited set of circumstances. This one does not. This applies to almost anything. And so that's why I have this assignment in here. You can pick something that's close to what you're interested in and see how did communication professors apply Fisher's narrative paradigm to this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just see. And then you come to class and you say, when we looked at their study, here's what we're going to explain what they did in their study. That's all you have to do. Cool. Let me see if there's anything that I wanted to talk more about. Because if not, we may be able to wind this. Oh, there is one thing. Let me jump back here. A couple of things, actually. You might think for a minute about what does a doctor think when a doctor helps someone who's in a wheelchair? What life might be like if you had to use a wheelchair. But there is an entire community of people who use wheelchairs who are dancers, who are athletes, and they think of having a disability as a culture, and it's a community. And there are a lot of medical researchers who think, no, it's an injury. We need to heal it. And if we find a way to repair the damage to your spine, you can throw away your wheelchair and not use it anymore. But people who belong to wheelchair culture would say, but you belong here. This is your group. These are your people. And those are two completely different narratives. Okay, that was just one quick example. The example I wanted to put a little more detail into, have you noticed that in the past just few years, people have often become very quick to believe conspiracies?
What kind of conspiracy?
Conspiracy. For example, I know it's still relatively fresh. I hope it's not an upsetting topic for you, but Shinzo Abe was assassinated. And already there are people who were saying that the World Economic Forum sent out an assassin to kill him because he didn't do what they ordered him to do when it came to the coronavirus. Now, I'm sorry, but that's silly. And there are people who did not want to take the coronavirus vaccine when it came out because they thought that the big pharmaceutical companies invented coronavirus deliberately so they could make a lot of money and take over the world. And those kinds of things, those kinds of conspiracy theories, in the past few years are very, very popular. And there was a study published yesterday, because I get these things in my email. Some researchers in Switzerland at the University of Genoa, they gave people, the participants in their study, 2 instruments. One of them measured how much do you need to have meaning in your life. Like, people to varying degrees want to know, these things that are happening to me, what do they mean? Some people have to know and other people don't care that much. The people who were higher in their need to know the meaning of everything were also more willing to believe conspiracies, because conspiracies give meaning to what's happening. Now, if you think for a minute, that's taking a bunch of facts and turning them into a story. It's kind of a wild story. It's a story that I would think is low in coherence, because there are lots of things about it that are obviously wrong. But these researchers said these conspiracies let you unite with other people, and often they tell you who the enemy is. And if you know who the enemy is, that tells you what to do. And for that reason, these conspiracy narratives are high in fidelity for these people. It's the story they want to live inside. That was one thing I wanted to get to just really quickly, and then I will look at this real quick. And we talked about that. I think we did good work today. You know, I came here today, I already said this, but I came here today thinking that when this class meets, I have to talk for 90 minutes. And I'm going to prep for next week. I'm going to make it a lot more about question and answer and about us having a discussion. Thank you for this. This is so much better. Do you have anything about the assignments coming up that you want to ask me? You've been on such a roll of asking good questions. Okay. The one thing that I do at the end of class, it'll take just 10 seconds. Shu ga anata o shukufuku shi, anata o mamoraremasu yo ni. Shu ga miko o anata ni terashi, anata o megamaremasu yo ni. Shu ga miko o anata ni muke, anata ni heian o ataeraremasu yo ni. I will see you next week. Thank you.